question is a related question. We'll have Ted first and then Dave with his opinion. When did Intel first realize, maybe the only ones who had this vision, that microprocessors could be used as the CPU in computers? I can tell you for a fact, because I was there, and some of my colleagues from National in the 70s were in the room now, we're also there. We always felt that microprocessors were for embedded control as a random logic replacement. Intel, of course, had that concept as well, but they were probably the first to recognize it could be the CPU for computers. Ted?
Well,
what was your recollection?
let's go back a little bit. There's a slide up here, the one that's got some colors on it with a chart. It's actually from this magazine. It was published January 1970 and predicted we'd get the cost of semiconductor memory. This one here. And the chart on the right predicts we'll have the cost of semiconductor memory below a penny a bit for DRAM anyway by 1972. Now stop and think a little bit about what that implies. If you want to do one typewritten page, let's say in a personal computer, you're talking about 3,000 bytes of memory. That's about $300 worth of memory for one typewritten page. So if you want a computer, let's say you could write a 10-page article on, now you're up to maybe $3,000 worth of memory. Now, you could build a high-speed processor out of small-scale and medium-scale integration for maybe $200 to $300. Cost of a microprocessor might be $50. If you have thousands of dollars invested in memory, would it make sense to try to save a few $100s and sacrifice
performance,
1 or 2 orders of magnitude of performance? And I think the answer was no. So we would look in the beginning for embedded control applications that didn't use much memory. That's where we figured the microprocessor would have its advantages. But with Moore's law in place, over time, the cost of memory has come down. In fact, I wonder if you realize how much it's come. You go out today, buy a little card to go in your digital camera, you get more like 100 million bits of memory for every penny you spend. That's like 8 orders of magnitude reduction in cost. In fact, what we say in those days, it may have been, several thousand times more expensive to put data in semiconductor memory than it was to put it on a sheet of paper. Today, that's reversed. It's now several thousand times more expensive to put it on a piece of paper than it is to have it in semiconductor memory.
Dave, why don't you follow that up and also tell the IBM design win story, which was really a crowning accomplishment in your career?
well, the follow up on this, I think you completed that story.
I might add one more point. One of the things that made it change, Intel initially was using a P-channel MOS process, but around 1973 they started working on an N-channel process, and I think originally Federico Fagin came and told me, he said they were going to relay out the 8008 in N-channel. And I said, well, there's a lot of problems. Can we fix them? And he said, absolutely. And he had a few things, and Stan and I had a few things. But the 8080 was really the first microprocessor that you could say would compete with one of those TTL circuit boards. And while we sold them for about $360 in single quantity price, in volume it was more like $20. But I remember one time we were running about 20 die per wafer on that part. We figured $50 to run a wafer, and maybe $1 to package. So we had a part that probably cost less than $5 to make, and we were selling quantity one for over $300. Now that was margin.
Let me be precise on the follow-up question. Dave, when was it your perception at Intel that microprocessors could be used as CPUs in computers? And following that up, what was the process for your team to go to IBM and propose using the Intel 8086 and then later the 8088 in their first PC? That's a two-part question.
Yeah, the first part was about the.
One was your conception of, hey, we can use microprocessors as CPUs.
When I
as
showed,
a CPU designer, this is very, very relevant.
When I showed up, it was interesting. Andy was running operations, and Andy he's a master of focus, and Andy was against the whole microprocessor thing at that time because we need to focus on memories. We're having big problems with the 1103. We had to get the design bugs fixed. We had static RAMs we were doing. Their EEPROM was being produced, and this was a diversion. And he said, there are 25,000 computers in the world. That's not enough volume for us to worry about computers. We shouldn't be making computers. And so the answer was, well, yeah, but there's a lot of controllers, a lot of sequential state designs made out of TTL. And remember, the first ads were traffic lights and scales and blood analyzers, and we were trying to think of every possible embedded control application we could imagine.
There was even a microprocessor bartender, I remember, in 1974.
The mixed drinks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The National Geographic article in 1982, that I know you have a copy of, shows a dairy farmer with a chip on a cow's neck, keeping track of how much the cow eats. I gave a talk once at a conference, and it was my 42 encounters with computers on my way to work. And I said, I'm going to jump forward in time, and there's going to be a microprocessor in your clock, and there's going to be one in your scale, there's going to be one in your alarm, there's going to be, there's going to be one at the gas pump at the gas station, there's going to be one more you
were clairvoyant.
And I invented every possible embedded application I could think of, my coffee machine, et cetera, et cetera. Today, there's hardly anything with a battery or a power cord that doesn't have a microprocessor inside it. So the original look was that there wasn't enough volume in computers, and so we needed to go after embedded control. I think when the MITS Altair came out, that was, and then we started seeing Ataris, and we started seeing TRS-80. I mean, there were a bunch
and
of...
Apple, too. Apple came out in 78.
Yeah. We started seeing people were taking 8080s and Z80s and using them as a real computer. That's when we kind of woke up. And we were kind of on the outside looking in. We were not in, Zilog kicked our butts at the 8-bit level with the Z80. It was better than the 8080, and our 8085 never, we had some volume, but never got the kind of traction we wanted. And then the 6800, and then the 68,000, and the Z8000, and we're doing.
But yet you were successful in selling IBM to the 8088.
So what had happened is we had we'd never sold anything to IBM. IBM was a closed shop. They didn't buy our kind of stuff.
They made their own
chips. They made their own chips. TI had gotten into IBM with TTL, and Jack Karsten. Well, first Ed Gelbach came from TI, and then Jack Karsten. He hired Jack Karsten in, and they said, you can actually sell to IBM, and they started putting salesmen on the IBM locations with no codes. They just in there selling and had application engineers in those locations. And we were lucky to break into this renegade operation down in Boca Raton, which did the display writer. Remember the display writer? Yes. IBM's answer to the Wang word processor.
There's a word processor.
We had a processor inside. Our microprocessor ran it, and only because they were far enough from the semiconductor division that we could actually get in there. And they also had System 1. That was their industrial control computer, and it used our microprocessors. Well, 8085, 80, I don't remember exactly which one it was, to be honest with you, but it must have been 8080 or 8085. And that was back at the time when Apple was starting to get going, and I've since talked to the people at IBM after they retired and I retired to understand the story about what happened inside, but the CEO at the time, I think it was Frank Carey, thought that they should do personal computer like Apple was doing, and got Phil Estridge down in Boca to put together this renegade group. They rented what had been a supermarket in a shopping center, strip mall, and he set up shop in there. And they had all these, remember, they had pipe and drape, black pipe and drape everywhere, because everything was super secret. And fortunately, some of the guys that worked on the products that had been designed there, that System 1 and mainly the display writer, were guys that Phil pulled into this operation. And our field application engineer, who had been supporting them, was known by these guys. And so I'm starting to get these hush-hush reports through the sales organization and the FAEs about what's going on down there. And it starts out that they are going to use the Z80. First thing Phil did is he took these guys, he bought them all an Apple I, sent them home for a month. And he says, I want you to stay at home, I want you to use this machine, I want to show it to your wife, show it to your kids, show it to your neighbors. I want you to learn everything like a user could ever know about this machine, and then come back, because we're going to design something to beat it, beat the Apple II. So I'm getting the word that they're going to use the Z80. And so we went down there and we made the pitch and we said, you know, you're not going to beat an 8-bit machine with an 8-bit machine. They're already out there and established. You got to have something new. You got to come out with a 16-bit machine. So you should use the 8086. So they went back, and then the word I get back, well, they think that they need to do 16, but they don't know which one. So they're going to go out and they're going to look, and they looked at the 6800 and they looked at the Z8000, and they're thinking that the Z8000 is probably the best product. But in comes Exxon and buys Zilog to be the foundation of their Office Products division to compete with IBM. Bump, that's gone. Now we're going to go to the 68. Let's see, it would have been the 68,000 at that point in time. And the 68,000 clearly had a 32-bit linear address. We had a 16-bit segmented address in the 8086. They had a general purpose register set. We didn't, but theirs was very VAX-like.
But they didn't have the peripheral chips, did they?
So they had designs for the peripheral chips. They had great specs for the peripheral chips, and our peripheral chips were further along. But they had a cost target, and they started looking at it, and they said, we can't afford it because the chips are too expensive. The peripheral chips are too expensive. And Motorola's promising to cut the price, but their chips can't be demonstrated. Our chips can be demonstrated. But probably the breakthrough really came in that we were doing a shrink of the 8086 in Israel at our design center. And the team over there came up with this idea of folding the I/O bus and double clutching it so that they send out 8 bits, in 2 cycles to get the 16-bit data and addresses in and out of the chip, because then you could use the 8085, 8080 I/O chips. And they were second sourced. AMD was making, a number of other people were making. They were very low cost. And one of our engineers said, well, maybe if we could use the 8086 with the 8080 I/O chips, maybe we could hit their price target. And somebody else says, well, how about the Israeli design, which had never been even bonded out. It was on the die, but it wasn't bonded out.
Wow.
So I said, well, let's go down and bid that design. We got an 8-bit bus, 16-bit address, 16-bit machine that uses these I/O chips. And by the way, would you bond some out so we could test them, just in case they call? And and then we just got into a price negotiation with the guys up in upstate New York on the buyers. And Bill Davidow came up with a great idea. He says, tell them it's going to be $5. I says, it's going to be $5.
In volume.
It's $45 and $5. He says, no, tell them it's going to be $5. I says, how can we do that? He says, 2 years from now it's going to be, tell them they're not going to buy that many the first couple of years.
Was that the first instance of forward pricing?
And so
Forward pricing?
we went in and we says, here's the price curve, and it's going to be $5 by the time you get into volume. And that was what it took, basically, to win the design.
That was a great design win for Dave's team.